I've just now done a Google on Las Vegas massacre bodies on the term under pictures, and I'm seeing very few pictures of dead bodies. Now, there is something really strange about what's happening in Las Vegas and all the thousands and thousands of pictures that were taken, the millions of hours, no doubt, of video taken by people who were running their phones during this crisis, people who are snapping pictures, people who have personal records of the ordeal of being under sniper fire. And yet there are very few pictures of dead bodies. We're not seeing incidental pictures posted on Facebook or on other platforms. There just seems to be a real paucity. I've gone halfway down this term. It's Las Vegas massacre dead bodies under images on Google, and you're not seeing pictures of dead bodies. You're seeing all kinds of other things. The first really good picture is more than halfway down the selection that I have, and it's in a newspaper. It is at Urban Christian News, and it shows amid a strewed field of bottles and cups and the like, two women. It looks like one is looking up from the rear end of one woman and part of another woman's body with her legs, and some people out of focus in the distance in the background. So they look like they're either injured or dead. Why do we not see more pictures, especially since everybody today seems to have a very high-powered computer device, a high-powered state activity reporting device called a smartphone, and there's very little to see? Why is that? These are questions that come up with government-controlled events. This is a government-controlled event now because the government has custody of all the process, right? The narrative immediately after the deaths of the perpetrators become government property, and they serve a government end, of course, for justice, right? We want to find out who did this, why he did this. We want to find out his motives. We're going to check his computer and go into detail on his search histories, all of his phone contacts, all of his odd habits are coming out, as we were mentioning how his gambling habits reported in the very fine piece of reporting in the New York Times. That, of course, of Stephen Paddock, the man who's responsible for killing about 60 people and injuring more than 500, as we're told. Now, why are there not more pictures to look at these questions and to see more of why? Another odd question: why there are so few, so few evidences of the story that we understand to be true. Why there's not really a lot of evidence for it? We're going to talk with Sam Spade about some of these things. He is a writer and a local libertarian. He's involved in the Bitcoin meetup group that meets every month. Which day is it, Sam?
It's the fourth Tuesday of every month. It's coming up in a little over 2 weeks. It's 5 o'clock is when the bull session starts. The meeting presentation is 6. Learn about Bitcoin there.
The bull session is a great thing to learn about what this phenomenon is. Again, the Bitcoin, for all of its faults, as I see them, is a picture of the important breakup of state-controlled systems. You might say the state narrative on what money is, and Bitcoin may be a fiat competing against the government fiat of the Federal Reserve dollar, but it still is a breaking up of these old systems, which have effectively enslaved us here in Chattanooga. And impoverished us in ways we can't see them, of course, and we're not getting much report about how that's happening. But Sam, what are the questions that you're making note of? We want to get also to talk about the Catalan vote in Catalonia, Spain, the vote for secession that followed last week, a vote among the Kurds to separate from Iraq. Also, a very important part of the larger picture, the geopolitical narrative. So, Sam, here on this on the Stephen Paddock massacre, what are the questions that are being raised outside of the mainstream media?
Well, let me continue with one that you started on, which is the news coverage. There are very few pictures that I can see anywhere on the site of people injured, bleeding, maybe even, as you point out, possibly dead, and you would not understand that given the number of cameras that everybody seems to be carrying. But the next step down the row, let me bring up, if you were a news person in Las Vegas working for a television station and you desperately wanted to get your work online and get people to see you and to publish your work. After an event like this, where would you go? Personally, I'd go to the hospital and I'd start to interview the people that were injured and released, because only 137 of them or something like that are considered serious enough to have had to stay in the hospital, and the rest of them were treated as outpatients, bandaged up and patched up and sent out the door. I'd be waiting there with the crew, and I'd stop them one by one, and I'd say, "Sir, what happened to you? How were you hurt? Shot in the arm? How did this happen? Where did the bullet come from? What was the events? Where did you see? What was going on?" I don't see any of that. I see absolutely no pictures. I would be bribing people to use their cell phones inside the emergency rooms to get pictures of what was going on in the emergency room. None of that. Absolutely nothing. Now, what strikes me is that this is actually not unusual. If you think of this kind of mass shooting, which seems to become so common in our society, these same issues, whether it's an elementary school someplace, any of those issues, this same set of issues and the same set of lack of visual evidence seems to occur with every one of them. I don't see ambulances pulled up in front of schools in Massachusetts to pick up injured and wounded students. Where are the pictures of these ambulances? Where are the pictures of people going to the hospital? I have to ask why these don't exist.
Okay, so that's question number one. What next, Sam?
The fact that the man is reported to have fired 1,500 rounds, you can't do that without leaving a lot of brass, a lot of spent cartridges lying around. And yet we have the cams of the people right after they broke into his room. The police had cams involved, taking pictures right away. There is no significant amount of spent brass. Sure, there's a few cartridges lying around, but you would see piles of spent brass everywhere. It just doesn't exist. So that's a second issue. A third is that when we look up the tally of firearms that this person had, he had 50 pounds worth of explosives. Now, I don't know about any of you out there, but I'm an old man. Actually, I'm about the age that he is supposed to have been. And if somebody asked me to hump 50 pounds of anything up 34 flights of stairs.
They do have elevators, Sam.
They do. But if I walked in with 50 pounds worth of high explosive into an elevator, somebody would say after a while, wait a minute, what are you hauling?
May I get the porter for you?
Yeah,
or would you like a little buggy
for you? Right. What are you hauling all this stuff up to our hotel room, please? Because it wasn't just the explosives, it was the ammunition, it was the weapons. The man really, really managed somehow at his age to haul a huge amount of stuff up into this room in order to actually engage in the weapons. Another issue.
That's three. Okay, number four.
All right, another issue. I am not an architect or a specialist in building construction. I know very little about it, but I do know that every instance that I have seen in which you had glass of any sort in a building, it was pretty beefy glass. Nobody wants to have windows on the 34th floor pop out. Nobody wants to have them smashed. And the result is that they're almost structural elements. They're very, very thick. And I was under the impression they're tempered as well. I would find it, I'd have to ask, how did he manage to smash those windows? Because that's not
well, he would have fired his largest caliber bullets into them to break them open.
That is a possibility.
That would be the 30 caliber. If he had a 45, he would have fired that.
Well, I doubt that a 45 would have had much of an effect, but it might have. Nonetheless, those are issues that I believe need to be looked at.
So that's four.
Only
four?
Those are the four that come to mind immediately. Yes.
Well, all right. Number five, I would say, Sam, would be the report in the Daily Mail, the English newspaper, and also in Newsweek about why since the police knew for an hour exactly where he was on the 32nd floor, why it took more than an hour for them to break into the room. Officers were waiting outside the door for at least 24 minutes, it says here, but it was the large type of the Daily Mail says it was 72 minutes before SWAT teams burst into Stephen Paddock's room. But the officers were waiting out there for almost half an hour. Now, what does that tell you that they're what does that mean? Does that, I'm sure that these were all good men, eager to get in, but they were held back. What is that? Is that a question, or is that just an issue of tactics, and we just have to?
No, and I believe that
bemoan the loss of
is
life while they were out there.
A question that needs to be looked at. But the other side of the coin, the question it goes to is whether or not they were given full rein and told to act aggressively to stop this shooting, or whether they were held back by some official response. And one of the points, I guess, on the other side of the weighing scale of this is the fact that I was really, for the first time in any of these shootings, pleased to hear a law enforcement official at the very highest level say, yes, there's some significant issues that we don't understand that we need to look at. Like, was there a second shooter? Like, how did he get all this heavy stuff up there? In other words, acknowledging the very questions that we are bringing up. Most of these other mass shootings that occur, whether they're nightclubs in Florida or schools or whatever, all of these issues that are brought up are quickly suppressed and ignored by the police, by the local law enforcement authorities. It's encouraging to see somebody with the authority to run the investigation saying, we need to find out what happened here and get to the bottom of it.
Well, the story in the Las Vegas Review-Journal has the headline today: Las Vegas strip shooter targeted aviation fuel tank, sources say. And so that's kind of a new element in the story. It says that 58 people are dead and that almost 500 are wounded. I think the number is coming down slightly.
I know a little bit about aviation fuel and fuel in general, and I can tell you that that's pretty much a non-issue. If that was the most common aviation fuel, which is a kerosene-based fuel designed to be run in turbojet engines, if you walked right up to the tank with a armor-piercing semi-automatic weapon and emptied it onto the tank, you would have a leaky tank. And that would be about all. It's hard to ignite kerosene. You have to get it hot. You have to get it above 120 degrees Fahrenheit in order to get it to ignite. And even then, it's just going to burn. So the potential for the possibility of a fire might have been there, but the potential for an explosion or something of that sort is pretty insignificant.
Well, the question I think that have to be asked by the local newspaper and others who are coming in probably asking tougher questions. If you're local, it's hard to ask tough questions, accusatory kind of questions of your local sheriff, who's your source, right? You want to keep on good relations with your source, so it's hard if you're local to ask the tough questions. But the questions that should be raised by the local press are: how and where did Paddock buy these automatic weapons? Where and when did he train to master them? How did he get them to the hotel room? Which is that's, I guess, question number 4, Sam. And how did he shoot from 2 windows? Was he registered in both? Apparently, there are more than one room. And why did it take the police 20 minutes to locate the room and the floor, and then 52 more minutes to get into the room? These are tough questions. And I think the question of the press is, or for the press is, will you stop asking these questions, or will you keep asking them? And I think there has to be a sense of belligerency by the press to say, look, these questions are not being answered, and to highlight the fact that they're not being answered, rather than just to suppress the report of the question not being answered. In other words, the copy has to be in some way adversarial. The report has to show a sense of adversarialness by the writer in the content. So his questions are part of the story as much as what the officials say, right? And that has to be, there has to be a sense of pressure by the reporter about these unanswered questions, because they're important questions. Just because they're not answered doesn't mean that they're not important. And I would suggest that the writer should make the story, should make it clear in the story that these questions are the questions that matter. Another one would be, Sam, ballistics. Bullets are being gathered. Of course, there were many ricochets from that distance. The bullets would tend to, if they hit the tarmac, to not go in but to bounce. Tracking those bullets down. The weapons that we saw, I think, are AR type. That's .223 caliber, a very small projectile. It's a wounding round. It's a short range round. Probably not worth much after 400 yards.
Yeah,
the range was 500 yards.
It's now a 22. It's basically a 22 rifle bullet.
Kind of a glorified .22 caliber.
Right.
And so, and aiming down, you have loss of accuracy, a very huge loss of accuracy on a non-long range round. So were the ones that hit 30 cal, were there 30 cals in the room?
Yes.
And what are the victims? What is being pulled from these victims? What kind of bullets are coming out of the human bodies of the injured and the suffering right now? Where are these bullets being kept? Are they being analyzed?
Well,
will they be analyzed?
I think you have touched on a larger issues that you and are very much a part of, and our listeners need to be aware of, and that is that when you centralize any effort, and that includes news gathering, you allow that effort to be controlled and owned by the people that print money. Whereas when you have decentralized news gathering, as you are, as I am, as all of the internet, most of the internet is, it allows the people to ask the hard and embarrassing questions that the centralized news agencies don't want to ask.
Sam, you and I need to be the slow men of Chattanooga. And caller, you're live on the air. This is David Tulis, and you're here with Sam Spade. What's on your mind?
Well, a 223 or 5.56 round have an effective range out to 1,000 yards, then you start to lose accuracy. One thing that I think that he did, I'm just estimating, is he set his elevation on the optic he had, because one of the rifles shown had a pretty, looked like a high-powered-ish scope. I think he set his elevation and just started sort of volley firing, dumping his magazine, reloading, dumping his magazine again. He's not going for accuracy. He's going for area of effect.
For volume.
That's what fully automatic fire is for anyway. That's my thought anyway. Thanks.
Yeah, I believe that's a very good point. I think that the issue of the range, though, that you talk about, effective range, that particular bullet uses the hypervelocity to deliver most of its damage. And by the time you go out as far as 400 or 500 yards, its velocity's dropped considerably. It's still a hefty piece of, 55 grain. It's still a hefty piece of metal. But now it no longer represents the level of lethal killing power that it did at a much closer
223 range. is a wounding round by design.
Yeah.
It's designed when it hits the body to spin inside the body. The 30 caliber is much heavier, and it penetrates and makes a much cleaner wound, and it will go through you if it has the impetus to do that. But
keep in mind that the situation that occurred out there was you had a large number, as the caller points out, a large number of individuals gathered in an enclosed space, and they were tightly packed. So whoever was firing these weapons didn't really have to aim all that well. It didn't have to be all that accurate. He just had to make sure that they went into the general area, and he would hit people. So.
Well, what other questions, Sam, would you say that the listener should keep his ear open for the answers to?
Well, I think the same sorts of questions that are occurring in all these mass shootings, one of which has to do with the use of psychotropic, perhaps that is not the right word, pharmaceuticals. And by this, I mean antidepressants. There's a lot of serious questions coming up about whether antidepressants, in fact, produce very erratic mental and emotional behavior, especially if they are given in doses that are inappropriate. Is he on any kind of medication of that nature?
Good question. LouRockwell.com has a story by Adam Gary from the Duran. And Stephen Winkler on June 21st prescribed to Stephen Paddock 50 10 milligram diazepam tablets. And these are described by a general website as a sedative hypnotic drug in the class of drugs known as benzodiazepines, which studies have shown can trigger aggressive behavior. Quoting drugabuse.com, chronic use or abuse of sedatives such as diazepam can also trigger psychotic experiences. And we'll look at that a little further. Some of the details that of other mass killers have been customers of the drug industry. They're customers, and some of them have had medical people prescribing drugs. Some even medical people who are connected with the federal military. And so we have again this question about the credit of the good people in Washington. Their credit is always they want it to always be going up. And I think our goal here at Nooga Radio is to create doubt about the official narrative, because we want there to be an alternative, and we want you, our listeners, to think in terms of the alternative future that I would say God, if he's merciful and gracious upon us, will open up for us, rather than a future of strip mining, predatory national governments which lie to the people. We would have a civil magistracy, a civil government that is very limited in what it can do, impotent in most areas of life, not demanding charge and authority in them, but retreating as I think is ahead. And we're talking with Sam Spade, who, with me, believes that there is a grand retreat ahead for the state. Let's see what happens in Las Vegas.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, digital FM 95.3 HD4 and 92.7 FM.